The first TT120 train sets have been in our hands for a few weeks now. How are they faring versus expectations so far? And what do they tell us of what is likely to follow? It's time to take a closer look. Okay, so we're going to do this unboxing for the TT120 Easterner set. There's lots of videos on YouTube that go through the unboxing of this, so really what I'm going to focus on here is my own experience, my own view of the model, first impressions out of the box, and then we'll get into our usual close-up views and into a running session. And the running session will be a tabletop running session because I don't have a TT120 layout. Very similar to what I did for the Kato Class 800 set in my previous smaller scale review, which I did a number of months ago. So we're going to follow that same sort of view, and then at the end of this particular session, I'm going to, I suppose, give my overall opinion of the quality of this set, what I think about it, compare it a bit to the Kato set in terms of the size, the features, the detail, the running performance, all that kind of thing, and kind of give a view as to what might be suited to whom, and kind of wrap it up there. Okay, so let's get this out of the box and we'll take a look at some of the elements, and then we'll move on with the review. Okay, so we've got the box open here. I'll take a look at the locomotive first, I guess, and if you've seen any other reviews, you'll see that it does come in the ice cube type packaging, which I think I like that is overlaid on top of the overall packaging because it does need the extra protection. First impression of this actual model is that it is a nice looking model. I do like the finish on it. I think the finish on it is actually better than the typical railroad A4s, for example, which kind of have a kind of a mattish kind of finish on them. It does have separately fitted parts on them. Some amazing little small whistle at the front there. The reds are on the side. It does feel very good in terms of a detail perspective. Actually, want to be just careful I don't do any damage to it. But overall, it looks like a very nice little model, and so we'll do a close-up on this. William Whitelaw. The lettering is excellent, and all of the line painting, etc. The logo, VR logo, and that nameplate looks quite nice as well. So all in all, this is very good. This is nicely rendered. You can see the wiring there for DCC, and it's like a 4-pin connector, yeah, which probably makes sense. There's no lighting on this model. So overall, that feels very good. I'm going to put it back here before I do any damage. But that's actually a nice start. My first impression is very positive with that. I think that Hornby had done a nice job on that locomotive, and it actually is a nicer finish than some of the 00 gauge models, steam models. So that's even better. So that's nice. Let's take a look at the coaches. 3 Mark I coaches. These will be a bit lighter, obviously. I guess my impression of the coaches is that they look like miniaturized 00 gauge coaches. It's as if somebody got the 00 gauge coach and just put it into a machine and reduced it down, because it kind of retains all the look, the interior detail, the labelling on the windows, there's nice glazing, the paint finish, the fine line work there, the numbers are crystal clear, it's crisp and sharp, a nice usual roof, usual underbody. It's just like and freewheeling as well. Apart from the couplers, which are obviously different, it just looks like somebody got a 00 gauge coach and shrunk it down, and it's got all the characteristics and features and look have all been retained at the lower scale, which which is very good. So I like the feel of it. It's a nice kind of size in the hand, and I think that's not a bad start at all. If all the coaches are to that kind of quality, if I call it that, I think that would be great. So let's just see what else we've got here. So in terms of different coaches, so we've got a brake, and it looks like we have a brake and 2 composites, which is kind of a funny makeup. Yeah, brake and 2 composites. So I would have thought that maybe we might have had a second open or something like that, or okay, so it's not a great train configuration in terms of the 3 cars that they're giving you, but the brake is fine, 1 composite is fine, but 2 composites is not so good maybe. Okay, never mind, that's probably not going to bother most people who get this set up like this. Power controller we'll look at later on, we don't need to take it out. Standard, looks like standard Hornby offering, which isn't great, and I might actually do some testing with the Backman controller as well. We're doing the running session. You got the typical kind of a shrunk down railer. It's like the normal double O gauge railer, just again shrunk down. There's some actual extra detailing for the locomotive, which is nice. And then we've got our track. Now, I guess if you've watched some of the other reviews, you'll know that there's some issues with this track, and I'll see, do I experience them? I guess I will do, because it's baked into the design of this track in terms of its geometry not being 100%. Straights are 100%, but not, it's the curves that are the problem. So when I get this set up, we'll take a quick look at that and kind of figure out what sort of an impact that might have. It does look nice. The scale of the track looks actually pretty good. From some of the videos I saw, I kind of thought the track was a little bit chunky, if I call it that way. But this actually looks okay here in real life, and I guess it's more the geometry issue that might be more of a problem. But it actually looks fine, looks good. Probably even looks a little bit better than the double O gauge track, or HO gauge track, if I'll call it that. So, and obviously everything is in proportion from a scale perspective, which I think should help the look of the model on the track as well. We've got an interesting kind of power jack here. Let's see how that works. Okay, let's see the wiring from the power controller for that. And as I say, I may attempt to use a Backman controller as well. All right, first impressions out of the box is that the locomotive looks really good. I think the coaches look really good. I think the track looks good, but I think there is that geometry issue. I think we know the power controller isn't great. But let's put it all together and actually see how it fares. I think that's what everybody really wants to see. Okay. Okay, so let's get into the close-up views, and we'll start off with the locomotive. As I say, this is a nice rendered locomotive. I really am pretty pleased with it from an appearance perspective. It's got a nice livery, it's got nice levels of detail, nice separately fitted parts, and it is a nice loco. There's detail in the cab as well, which I'll show later on, and overall, it's a very good rendition. You can see the numbering there. The lettering is all done excellently. You can see the separately fitted brass parts there. Nice coal effect in the tender, and a nice logo there, BR logo, and a nice gangway at the end with the coupler. So we'll look at the coach, and again, as I kind of said, my initial impression of the coach was like literally a standard double O gauge Mark I coach that had been shrunk down with all its detail preserved, and that's pretty well what we have here. You can see the corridors and seats in the coach there. You can see the labelling on the window, which is really, really good. Nice livery, nice lining. Underbody is identical to the kind of standard type coaches, the double O gauge coaches. So all in all, it's a good quality coach and a nice free running coach, though there's a running issue with the curve track, and we'll see that when we get into the running session. So, but overall, appearance wise, no issues with this coach whatsoever. Now we get into the 360 view, and probably showing up the livery a little bit better in this particular view. Again, you see that amazing little whistle and number plate at the front there, the running number. All very impressively rendered. The buffers are fixed, albeit they kind of look like sprung buffers, but they are fixed. But this is a very nice quality locomotive, and it's kind of hard to believe, even looking at this, that it's the scale that it is because of the level of detail. And you can see into the cab there, the nice kind of brass effect fittings that are shown in the cab from a detail perspective. So this is top notch. It really is. This is certainly above the kind of railroad plus level. Here are the three coaches together, and again, you know, you might as well be looking at double O gauge coaches here, because they're pretty well the same. You know, there's very little to tell the difference. That nice glazing there. These are nice coaches, nice running coaches. I have to put a little bit of foam underneath it. They'd be running all over the place here. No qualms at all. You know, the locomotive and the coaches in this set are top notch, and I think Hornby have done a very good job. And these were the two most important items that they needed to get right, and they have done so. So I think these two items, from an appearance perspective, I'm well pleased with them, and I think, you know, I'll score them accordingly. Okay, so we've got our track put together. We're all set here to run in the locomotive. I haven't applied any power yet. Just kind of looking at the circuit and how it kind of fits together. There's a kind of a noticeable lift of the inner rail versus the outer rail. I think other people have seen this as well. Now I've got this on a hard surface here. There's no way I'm going to be tacking this down. This is a glass top. So that's just, I guess, something you wouldn't have expected to see, and I suspect that's a consequence of the geometry. So what we're going to do now is just start this guy off and see if he's in the forward or reverse direction. I'm not sure. He's forward. Okay, so this is the first running. And okay, so we've just derailed on this point here, and that's not a good start. Now the point is heading into the kind of curvature on the track there, so that's not helping. So I'll just put this back on. We'll run him around again. Okay, let's try to get going again. I don't like that curvature on the track, I really don't. You can see the locomotive is actually tilting there. Now if you pin that track down, then that should be okay. Okay, we got through okay that time. Maybe there's an issue with the initial railing of the locomotive. So it's smooth. The running action is smooth. Okay, so I'm going to let this run, and we'll check back in later on. We'll put on the coaches and maybe see how fast she can go. Okay, so now we've added some coaches here, and we're running with the full train. Now, do you hear that noise? That noise is actually the coaches, resistance noise of the coaches on those curves. We didn't hear that for the locomotive because we've been running that on its own and we haven't heard that. But we do get it with the coaches. So every time they hit the curve, you'll hear that noise. So that's not good. And I've never actually heard resistance noise like that. And again, it's down to issues with the track geometry on those curves. Can do a reasonable speed here. I'm not going to attempt the top speed, however. I'm going to take the locomotive out on its own to do that. But we will get up to a reasonable speed. I think I've run this up to about 80% power. And I'll be honest to you, the curvature on those tracks, it doesn't really show that much there. But I was pretty nervous of derailment here. It's a hard table and there's a hard kitchen floor underneath, so if this had gone off the rails, I could have been looking at a pretty nasty situation. Now, one thing I will comment is that the track kind of flattened as you went through the running session, but you can kind of see the little gaps between the rails on the inner rails as the track is flattened. So again, it's showing the bad geometry of the track. So when you connect the track correctly, you get the bowing effect. When it flattens down, you get the effect that the inner rail, there'll be a gap between the inner end rails. So that's what you get if you pin the track down, you'd see that. So we're just slowing it down here now. We have switched over to a Bachmann controller, and I did this because the low speed performance was poor and noisy on the Hornby controller, and if you're familiar with that Hornby controller, you'll know that. But this Bachmann controller historically I found is pretty good, and it does give good low speed performance, as you can kind of see here. So we're not getting any noisy kind of performance here, we're just getting that noise of the resistance noise of the coaches on the curves. So switching back to the locomotive on its own, I wanted to do some kind of low speed crawling to get a feel for the locomotive, how it handles the low speed, and I could only do this with the Bachmann controller. You're not going to get low speed performance out of the Hornby controller at all. So I think when I do the scoring here, I'll probably need to give two scores. I'll need to score against one controller and versus the other one. So if you're just getting the set and you don't have another controller, you're going to have to live with the poor performance at the lower end. So now we're cranking this up. We're only going in one direction speed-wise now. We're going to crank this up. We need to get the final test that I do on every locomotive, which is the 100% power test, to see how fast she goes and to make sure she stays on the track and doesn't do anything crazy. So here we go. We'll crank it up now. You can hear the engine pitch increasing there, and we're at maximum speed right now. So I'll measure this and calculate it in terms of the miles per hour scale speed. And miraculously she's staying on the track despite the issues on those curves, and I have to give credit to this locomotive because I really wasn't confident she'd stay on the track anything even close to this speed. I've only attempted this speed because it has been so good in the running session. So there we go. I think a pretty good performance, all things considered. Okay, so let's get into the summary. We've been looking at the Hornby Easterner TT120 train set, and this is the DCC ready version. Comes with the A4 locomotive number 60004, William Whitelaw, with 3 British Rail Mark 1 coaches. It has got the R7279 controller and transformer. It also comes with a re-railer, a third radius starter oval, and the track pack 1. It's fitted with a 3-pole motor with both locomotive and tender pickup, and that locomotive runs on a minimum of radius 2 curves. It comes, as I mentioned, in DCC ready form with a tender mounted next 18 socket. Extra features are really the separately fitted detail and the detail within the cab area, as well as things like the re-railer and the TrackPack 1, which is an extra in the overall set. The unboxed weight for the locomotive is 150 grams, and for the coaches it's 38 grams per coach. The top scale speed, I clocked this at, was 93 miles per hour at 100% power, and that was only under DC, so I've only run this in this review under DC. So the retail selling price, there's two models, the DC Ready version, 194.49 recommended retail, and that is the only price you'll pay for it on the Hornby website. And similarly, the DCC Sound version, which is coming for 249.99. And those prices are as of February 2023. So let's get into the scoring. Now, I've actually scored two sets of scores here, one for the full set and one when if you were to exclude the curves and the controller. And the reason for that, I think you've seen during the running session. It is assuming you pay the full price up front, so there's a slight difference in the price value score. So some of the other scores are changed by having a different controller, in this case the Bachmann 46605, which you'd have to purchase, and having different track, which would be Pico track, which you'd also have to purchase to make up the equivalent of the set. So running performance wise out of the box, it's a 7 out of 10, and that's driven by the controller, which is particularly poor at low speeds, and it's also driven by the track, which has this issue on the curves, both the kind of bending issue and also the resistance issue with the coaches. Not a great experience, so overall running performance is 7. But the locomotive itself is actually quite good, and when you marry that with a proper controller, get the higher score I'm showing on the right hand side there. I think it's fair to score it this way so you get an idea of how good the actual locomotive and the coaches are on their own, and if you had decent curved track then and a decent controller, you'd be getting a better running performance experience out of them. Appearance and detail is obviously the same, and the appearance of the track is actually fine as well, so that's included in that score. Extras and variants, it's pretty small. Obviously for this set there's not a lot of features in the set overall or on the locomotive or the coaches. There's no lighting, for instance, so that's a 6 out of 10 and it's the same either way. Build quality is different because the build quality on both the track and the DC controller are, I would say, rather poor, so that's dragging down the score if you have the full set. Again, take those out of the equation, you get a better score. Packaging and documentation is overall it's fine. The only thing it doesn't actually talk about is the couplers and how best to uncouple those, which is best to uncouple them from underneath with a little small tool. So it doesn't really talk about that, so that's a gap in the documentation. But the packaging actually is certainly adequate, and I like the separate package for the locomotive. I think it's certainly sufficient for that. Price value is a little bit better for the full set because obviously you're getting the full oval of track and you're getting the controller, albeit you can discount that track, but the controller is still usable, and obviously take that out of the equation that the value is not as good if you exclude those. The overall score, however, is different. So if you just take this set out of the box using the track and the controller, it's a 7.9, which is really testimony to the locomotive and the coaches rather than the overall set, which is a good score. But obviously it's an even better score if you marry this with a better controller and better track. You'll get a better overall score. So I think there's a message there. There's room for improvement. I think Hornby definitely need the track, whatever about the controller, the track has to change. So they need to fix that track on future revisions of all the sets that contain that curved track. So I'm also doing a scoring comparison here with the out-of-box for the Easterner and the Kato Class 800, which is an N-gauge set I reviewed before Christmas, just to get a relative view between those two sets. So this is the production set out of the box scores. So we've just been through them for the Easterner, and you can see that the Kato would have a better running performance. It comes with a better controller. It has a very nice motor in the set as well. So running performance wise, it is better. Appearance and detail is better on the Easterner. Certainly there is a greater level of detail. It's more equivalent to a double O gauge model. You're not quite getting that on the Class 800 N gauge model, and I think that's in general that's going to be the case with your N gauge. There's a compromise there, so I would say that there's definitely a difference there for going with TT versus N gauge. You are going to get improved levels of detail, and the kind of separately fitted parts that you get on the Easterner set, for example, you're not quite going to get all of that. You're not going to get the detail in the locomotive cab area that you get, for example, you wouldn't get that on an N gauge model. Extras and variants are the same. Build quality, as is let down by the curved track and the controller on the Easterner. It's very, very good on the Kato model. Packaging and documentation, talked about that for the Easterner. The Kato, it's kind of a little bit patchy. They give you a lot of Japanese documentation, so it's fine, but because of the level of Japanese documentation, it is a little bit here and there, but it does cover everything it needs to cover. Price value, 9 out of 10 for the Easterner set and 10 out of 10 for the Kato set. So there is a difference here. The Kato set is better value, and that's down to the fact that its track system is excellent and performs really well, and its locomotive and its power controller is excellent as well. And I probably gave it too low a score. It's probably closer to a 10 out of 10. I docked it a mark because of the low end, and that was incorrect because they use the low end to put some power on the line for the lighting before the locomotive will start to move. So this probably should have been a higher score for the Kato on the performance one. I think the point about this particular slide is that there is a difference between the two. The Kato 800, Class 800 set as a set, quality-wise, is top-notch out of the box. Easterner set, let down by the curved track, let down by the DC controller. But the locomotive and the coaches are good, and they have a better level of detail than their N-gauge cousins. So that's a very important point. So let's take that one away from this particular slide. So that brings me down to my kind of final recommendation, and I'll get into my kind of final comments about TT120 after this. So my out-of-box impression of the Easterner set was a very positive one. As models, the locomotive and coaches are excellent and probably exceeded my original expectations. Comparing them to Hornby's 00 gauge range, they would sit in a fully specified model range and not something from a Railroad or a Railroad Plus range, for example. The satin finish on the locomotive is actually a superior finish to many more expensive 00 gauge locomotives, so hats off to Hornby for hitting the mark with these first models. Now the rest of the set is not to the same standard. The curved track is simply not fit for purpose, and the DC controller is what it's always been, one of the poorest controllers you can buy, and an injustice to the locomotive which deserves better. The rest of the track, railer and buffer are all fine, and the coupling system works for me. Despite its shortcomings elsewhere in the set, the cost of the locomotive and coaches alone would exceed the asking price for this set, so based on their quality and performance, the TT120 Easterner set from Hornby comes highly recommended. Yes, you're going to have to purchase a circular Pico track to go with it, so you need to factor that into your budget. You could probably live with the DC controller for a while if purchasing as a starter set, but some investment will be needed here as well if you're going to stay on DC for the long term. If you're considering going to DCC, the sound-fitted Easterner at $249.99 is definitely worth a look, and it may be better just waiting for that at this stage. So what are my latest thoughts on TT120 based on my Easterner experience? Well, in general, they're very positive. Steam locomotives are always going to be the more challenging to deliver, and what Hornby have delivered here hits the mark both visually and performance-wise. The fact that the locomotive was able to navigate the awfully poor curved track without derailing is beyond me. For me, the locomotive and coaches were the most important components in the box. Everything else in the box has a second source, so even if they were terrible, it wouldn't be a showstopper. If the locomotive or coaches weren't good, we'd have a problem. So while the set as a whole has its issues, its most important components hit the mark, and if models such as the HST and Class 66 can do the same, then TT120 will be starting to build a base of desirable models for those who have chosen to model in this scale. TT120 isn't for me personally at this stage, due to my existing investment in 00 gauge and the likely lack of any Irish models for many years to come, if ever in my lifetime. But I can see the merits of the scale, and based on Hornby's first offerings, I can see modelling in this scale appealing to a wide range of modellers, to the point that people with more modest investments in their N-gauge or 00 gauge may be tempted to make the transition. Combining TT120 with the low entry costs of Hornby's Bluetooth sound system could make for a compelling combination for people who have been sitting on the fence in terms of entering or re-entering the modelling world. It's still very early days, however, and range depth and availability will be issues for some time to come. Geopolitical instability may also play a part here, so I definitely wouldn't be undertaking any major sell-off of your existing layout just yet. So the litmus test of the first locomotives and rolling stock has been passed. The track issues need to be fixed, and in the meantime your local Pico stockist will happily talk to you about the alternative. Now it's all about delivery of the next wave of models, and this is where I still have some concerns. Hornby are biting off an awful lot here, and in an ideal world I think we'd all like to see at least one or two other vendors chipping in with their own models to help progress the range delivery a lot quicker. Retailer support will also be needed in due course, but right now they'd only be competing with Hornby themselves for stock they don't have yet and won't have for a while. Hornby have already admitted they're in catch-up mode for 2023, which in itself is an admission of the challenge at hand. So what are your thoughts on these two particular sets from Hornby, the Easterner and the Scotsman? If you have these sets, what's your experience been like, and what do you think of the locomotives and rolling stock? Please let me know in the comments, and also let me know your longer term thoughts on TT120 now based on these first sets. Thanks for joining the review today. I hope you found it of interest, and if you have, please hit a like on the video. We'll hopefully see you on the next one. So in the meantime, take care and happy modelling.